Alright, cool. We're live, we're live. My squeaky chair says that we're live. Okay, cool. So, hello everybody. Not really planning for a particularly long live stream on the subject. I'm here to do a couple of things. Indulge in my bad habit, talk about a little issue that's been on my mind, briefly touch up on the long essays I have planned for this month. I think I'm just going to produce my Soviet imperialism in East Germany ones first, and then save the Chomsky essay for last, because, quite frankly, guys, I really want to make sure that I nail this essay, and I'd rather put it off into the unforeseeable future to make sure I make the most rock solid criticisms that I possibly can of Chomsky, because he is very well revered and he is a very respected professor and academic. And if I don't approach this topic very carefully, it could be very bad for my image and it could be very bad for my long term credibility. So I'm going to sink as much effort as I can into that. But otherwise, I've got two other bitchin' essays coming up on some socialist history that I think you guys are going to like quite well. So, anywho, bad habit time. But while I'm indulging in my bad habit, let's talk about the death penalty. Let's talk about the death penalty, right? So, in the grand scheme of things, I believe the death penalty should be abolished. I don't think that in the grand narrative, meta narrative of the cosmos, that the death penalty should remain, as in within the context of a late stage communist society in which we're a couple centuries in, or we're even a few generations in, and class antagonism has died down. When we're living under global socialism, class antagonism has died down for the most part, and the number of acts of counter-revolution and right-wing terror is just leveling off and decreasing more and more. Then we can talk about abolishing the death penalty. All right, that's pretty much where I believe the death penalty should be abolished. Otherwise, I believe that within the context of socialism, during the early stages of socialism, during the early stages of class warfare, the death penalty should definitely be a thing. Not necessarily as a deterrent, but as an answer to people that are just too far gone and are so ideologically committed to the destruction of socialism and the ruining of the new system that they are basically willing to wreck it and destroy it as to have it overturned, as to restore capitalism, basically. So that's where I think the death penalty is appropriate, as well as like serial killers, psychopaths, human traffickers, just the real scum of the earth that are kind of beyond redemption, people that would unironically make the world a better place if it would unironically make the world a better place if these people just weren't alive, you know? That's my attitude. Like, why even bother wasting state resources on keeping them alive, you know? Just take them out. That's my attitude. Now, with that being said, I don't think the use of the death penalty should be particularly liberal, at least in the later stages of socialism, but it should be fairly liberal during like the initial years, because that's when counter-revolution and reaction is at its most likely. It's when civil unrest of civil war proportions will be taking place, as the forces of reaction will coalesce, because defeated classes will never give up their power willingly, and they will never accept their new position at the same level of equality and power as everybody else. They will do everything in their power to overturn the current system, because it is in their material interest to do so, because they have a lot to gain. All right? We're talking about 3 to 5% of the population here. These are the people we're talking about. The overwhelming majority of the population, overwhelming majority of workers, and even like sects of like the lower capitalist, the low capitalist will benefit from socialism overwhelmingly. Otherwise, I've heard some liberal arguments against the death penalty, and I don't really agree with them. Like, for example, one argument I've heard from the likes of social democrats, like, what if you get the wrong person? You know, it's true. It's entirely possible that we get the wrong person, someone who's genuinely innocent, that shouldn't be put to death, but because we think they're the perpetrator, they're on death row. And that's the reason why death row exists and why carrying out executions takes as long as it does. It's a very messy process. We're talking about taking life. So the state is comprised of fallible human beings, which make mistakes and errors. This is very true, which is why we need to make it the most accurate state possible, the most efficient state possible. So if you've got people who are wrecking, if you've got people who are stealing, you've got serial rapists, you've got people that are a threat to the public that are causing issues, or people that are just mentally ill, you know, the state will occasionally arrest the wrong people. The state will occasionally lock up people that are innocent, right? There are innocent people in jail, and this could even happen under a socialist society. So should the state stop locking up mentally ill people? Should the state stop locking up criminal elements because occasionally they lock up the wrong person? That's the logic I'm operating on right now. Is infallibility really the prerequisite by which we enforce the law and enact justice? I mean, I've heard other arguments too, very much moralistic arguments about like the sanctity of life and so on. Why we should like respect the will of the living, respect living people, and we should care about life. I mean, yeah, in general, but we're talking about the lives of people that are complete and total scumbags and a complete and total threat to society, to the point to where they're beyond the point to where you can ever possibly rehabilitate them to where they're not a threat anymore. These are the people that we're talking about here. And yeah, I mean, we could lock them up for life, expend resources doing that. But in a hypothetical, there is a tiny sliver of a chance that they could escape. They could come out of jail and they could run amok, run about, running amok. Now, I know the chances are slim, but it is possible. Other things as well is like, just why expend the resources? I mean, why, you know what I mean? Like, I just don't see a point. I mean, I suppose there's probably like more innocent ways of dealing with people like this, like having them deported and just labor colonies and so on. I don't know. But in general, I don't really see much moral qualm with executions. That's basically my stance. So yeah, in a sense, in the short term, I'm pro death penalty. So let's see. Let's see what we got. What are some other common arguments I hear against the death penalty? Because I hear quite a few. A lot of it just comes down to moralizing about the sanctity of the lives of the soon-to-be executed. Honestly, and I think if you're if you're a hostile threat to society and you're that much of an antisocial piece of shit, then after a certain point you're kind of beyond redemption, and you're beyond, after a certain point it would just be better off if you weren't here. You know what I mean? It'd just be better off like if these people just weren't here. Wonder how the infrared fags are going to twist this shit out of context. They will find a way. Trust me, they will find a way. Let's see what we got here. Do you agree or disagree that the way in which the imperial core of the United States practices the death penalty is fundamentally classist and racist? Well, yeah, absolutely. The problem isn't the death penalty itself, it's the death penalty within the context of capitalism. You see, comrades, I am at a state in my political developments where I don't look at anything within a vacuum or within the lens of whether it is just good or bad, because it's very simplistic and it's very myopic. I always analyze everything within the context of class. Because it's sort of like when you take the red pill, when you are programmed to think like a Marxist, you don't think the same way anymore, and that's sort of the way I am. I don't think the way that other people think. The problem with the death penalty is the death penalty under the context of capitalism for the most part, because the entire prison industrial complex is incredibly fucking racist. It's racist. It's meant to silence dissent. I mean, that's really the problem, is it's meant to suppress the public and the popular sentiments below. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are people who genuinely should be locked up But in general, when it comes to the U.S. state apparatus, they carry out executions of potential threats to the state. I mean, that's really it. Like, I've talked about Michael Renohl. I haven't talked about Huey Newton. I haven't talked about Che Guevara or Malcolm X. I mean, if you're someone who's genuinely a threat to capitalism and you're not a delusional narcissist who thinks you really are a threat to the system, people that are a genuine threat to the state tend to have a life expectancy between 25 and 35. They tend to drop like flies. They tend to not live very long. And if they do, they're constantly harassed, hounded, blackmailed, threatened, and fucked with by US intelligence. That's just the way it goes. Oppose ceding any power to the bourgeois state includes the death penalty, but we will put them up against the wall. Yeah, exactly. Right here. Oh, what? What? Because I said moral fagging? Yeah. Honestly, man, that's kind of the shit poster in me. Uh, I've been on image boards my entire life. I've got some bad habits. I apologize if I touched a nerve there. It's just a figure of speech. I did not say that as a derogatory term towards homosexuals. But if it makes you guys feel uncomfortable, I will work on that and work on saying it less from now on. All right, where were we? Do you think America will die in the next 30 years? No. America's here to stay for a while. Imperial core is still very stable and entrenched. It's going to take a lot more than some economic crashes and supply chain issues to take down America. What's ultimately going to take down the United States is really just people becoming well organized and class conscious enough to where they no longer see the US government as legitimate and they want to put a new state in its place that they perceive as more legitimate. It's all about legitimacy. If you can create a legitimacy crisis in the United States, you can create a power vacuum for a new regime to take power. It's just here in America, as I've said, ideology is so entrenched, so embedded and so entrenched. Everyone sees the system as legitimate, so there would be too much hostile resistance. And because there's still a strong enough, well-to-do middle-class base within the United States, even though this middle-class base would still benefit under socialism, like people making 40 to 65, 70K a year would benefit within a socialist economy. Absolutely, no doubt in my mind. The problem is that even though their lives aren't great, they're good enough to where they don't want to overthrow the system. That's really all it comes down to. It's more in their interest to reform it, make it a little better, make it a little more equitable, and so on. That's really the kind of consciousness that lingers within most of the general public. So for now, I think the line resistance in the first world, revolution in the third world is the correct one. Of course, fight for reforms because reforms begot reforms, and there are certain reforms that pave the way for revolution down the line, like democratic reform, for example. Lenin talked about this, I believe, in The Dictatorship of the Proletariat and The Renegade Kautsky, but he said that democratic reforms, basically, because they pave the way for genuine change, because it basically forces the state to give in and concede to a bunch of demands. And when the state concedes to all of those demands, it creates a situation where reforms begot reforms, and it destabilizes. Because when people actually have a say, when they actually have power, and when they're class conscious enough, they're gonna throw off the shackles of exploitation. You know, it. So that's what needs to happen. Struggle for democratic reform, struggle for anti-war activism, anti-imperialism, economic reform as well. I think single-payer healthcare is definitely something that should be struggled for. Higher wages, we've got strike waves breaking out across the country. I mean, there is striking, there is active class warfare going on right now. It's just that class warfare is being silenced by the media, so they're not talking about it. I don't care about the Jason drama. No comments. Do you think that there are most likely? Do you think that those that are most likely to resonate with our message is the apolitical working class disillusioned? Yeah. Uh, I would say so. More specifically, service workers. So let's talk a little bit about it. Organizing in my experience. In my experience, I've talked to a lot of people in the warehouse that I work. The warehouse I'm going to leave for here in a few minutes, but I mean, I've talked to a lot of people there that aren't even active socialists. But whenever I speak in communist rhetoric, they all basically agree. Like now that the Cold War is officially over, people aren't as heavily propagandized, and anti-communism isn't as heavily shoved down people's throat. I mean, politicians will still red bait, but in general, people within my age bracket, like I would say between ages 16 and 35, that's pretty much a Goldilocks zone where class consciousness is starting to rise because upward social mobility is at an all-time low right now. People within this demographic are going to objectively have worse living standards. They're going to be paid less, have to work harder, and are objectively going to have a worse life than their parents and their grandparents did at the height of their day. And it's only going to continue to decline. Living standards are really only going to continue to stagnate. Social mobility is increasingly becoming downward, and we're set up for another crisis and crash here in a couple of years. And when it happens, we're going to see another big value transfer from the bottom to the top. You're going to see more spontaneous acts of terror. You're going to see more striking and protesting. I think that the BLM protests of last year, the anti-racist protests, they were mostly cathartic, lashing out, but I think it's very much a taste and very much an illusion for what's to come, because I think it's going to get a lot worse. So in the time being, tying this in with the reading group I was talking about, I want to help myself help you. So let's talk about the reading group. All right. This Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, I'm hosting a reading group in my server. In fact, I'm going to include a link to my server for all those that are interested. I introduced a verification process because fascist trolls and idiots kept coming in my server and kept trying to shit it up. So what I did was I introduced verification to basically keep that from happening. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and include a link to my Discord server in this live stream. In fact, I'll link it right here, and you guys can look that up. Hardy har har. But anyways, so I'm doing this reading group, and let me tell you what the objective is. I mean, for me, it's to make me a better communist, but by helping you guys become better communists, by teaching others, it helps to teach me and reinforce these concepts which I'm learning in my head. And it makes me a more skilled rhetorician, it expands my knowledge pool, and it helps me become a better wizard, a better Marxist wizard, so to speak. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to have a little Hogwarts session, comrades. We're going to come to my server, and we're going to read another view on Stalin. There's a segment, not the whole text, but there's an excerpt from it about the so-called Holodomor collectivization. I want to go through that segment because there's a lot of misinformation, and there's a lot of work cited from various fascist demagogues and various glow ops that have been pushed over the last few decades that you guys should be made aware of. It'll give you a better picture of what actually happened, because this is something that people are going to bring up. Unfortunately, this is a topic because you can't avoid, if you're an actual like scientific socialist, you can't avoid to talk about actual socialist projects, and people are inevitably going to bring this up, sometimes in bad faith, and there's a lot of bullshit that needs to be debunked, and there's a lot of misinformation around the subject. I'm eventually going to make a more extensive video on the topic, but for now, I'm going to invite you guys in, and we are going to have a conversation or a reading about it. Reading is going to run for anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. We're going to take turns reading, and then we're going to have like a post-reading discussion where we talk about the information that we have reviewed. Let's see what we got. What do I know of the world's problems? More than enough. The suicide epidemic, For a second, I thought you meant suicide epidemic as a channel. Like there's a channel called the Suicide Epidemic. But no, depression's at an all-time high. Drug abuse is at an all-time high. Not really much to say besides we're living in an age of increasingly polarized and alienated life. Like people have fewer friends, fewer social connections than ever before, despite having more social media connections than ever before. And there are ways to combat it, and we can talk about ways to fight it, because there are ways to fight it and there are ways to overcome it. But we're talking about changing a culture, and we're talking about a very embedded and very entrenched culture that ultimately needs to change. And trying to change a culture is a lot like trying to change a partner in a relationship. It can happen, but it takes time. Let's see what we got. Have I ever read any of the writings of Thomas Sankara? Can I cover Thomas Sankara, his contributions to Marxism and putting socialism in practice in Burkina Faso? All right, so aside from the 3 subjects I have for this month, next month I have a couple other essays in mind. One of them is going to be about the Soviet famine, and then I could make a video about Thomas Sankara. I think that would be a good topic to cover. But anyways, I'm running a little over my allotted time for today. I got to go to work. I'll see you guys this Friday. Meet me in the Discord at 7 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to go ahead and drop the Discord link in the description. And damn it, I got to kill the stream first. Well, take it easy, guys.